I never thought I'd be part of a contract relationship with one of the richest men in the city. It was supposed to be business. He paid, I stayed. But feelings weren't in the contract. Now I'm caught between the money that saved my life and the love that's changing his. I never thought my life would become the kind of story people watch online. But here we are. My name is Zara Williams, and 2 years ago I was drowning, not literally, although some days it felt that way, but financially. My design business, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into for 3 years, was barely keeping the lights on. I'd maxed out 2 credit cards just to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment that doubled as my workspace. The irony wasn't lost on me. I helped other people create beautiful spaces while mine was falling apart. Then came the diagnosis, mom's cancer, stage 3. The doctors were optimistic, but the medical bills, they were devastating. Insurance covered some, but nowhere near enough. I remember sitting at her kitchen table, the same one where she'd helped me with homework growing up, staring at numbers that seemed impossible. How was I supposed to choose between keeping my business alive and keeping my mother alive? Some nights I'd lay awake wondering if I should just give up on my dreams completely, get a corporate job, sell out, anything to make those bills stop piling up. That's when Alexander Reed walked into my life. Or rather, I walked into his. At a charity gala I was only attending because my friend snuck me in as her plus one so I could network. Alexander Reed, billionaire tech investor, the kind of man whose name appeared in business magazines and whose companies shaped the future. I noticed him before he noticed me. Hard not to, with that commanding presence and the way people practically parted like the Red Sea when he moved through the room. I never expected him to approach me, never expected him to comment on the custom jacket I was wearing, one I'd designed and made myself because I couldn't afford anything appropriate for such an event. And I certainly never expected what came next, an invitation to his office to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement that would solve all my financial problems with 3 simple conditions. First, I would live in his penthouse. Second, I would accompany him to events as needed. Third, I would tell no one about the nature of our agreement. The contract would last exactly 1 year, and in return, he would pay me enough money to clear my debts, cover mom's treatment, and give my business the investment it desperately needed. A business transaction. That's all it was supposed to be. A desperate solution to a desperate situation. What I never counted on was how quickly lines could blur, how easily business could become pleasure, and how completely unprepared Alexander Reed was for a woman who saw past his wealth to the lonely man beneath. So stay with me as I reveal how a desperate agreement turned into something neither of us expected, and what I learned about love, power, and self-worth along the way. Because if there's one thing I know now, it's that some contracts are meant to be broken, and some payments come with a price that changes everything. I still remember exactly what I was wearing the night I met Alexander Reed. A black dress I'd thrifted and altered myself with geometric gold accents I'd sewn by hand. It was the nicest thing I owned, saved for special occasions, and this charity gala definitely qualified. My friend Kira worked for the event company and had snuck me onto the guest list as her assistant. My real mission? Hand out as many business cards as possible without looking desperate. The Wilshire Hotel ballroom was intimidating, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and people whose watches cost more than my yearly rent. I was nursing the same glass of champagne for an hour, trying to look like I belonged, when I overheard 2 interior designers discussing a project. Perfect opening. I joined their conversation, shared some ideas, and was just about to mention my business when a hush fell over our little circle. That's when I first saw him. Alexander Reed, 6'2" with shoulders that filled out his custom suit perfectly, dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to cut right through you. Everyone knew who he was, the tech investor who turned startups into empires, the man with the Midas touch, and he was walking straight toward us. Interesting perspective, he said, and it took me a moment to realize he was addressing me. The integration of sustainable materials without sacrificing aesthetic appeal. Not many designers prioritize both. I almost choked on my champagne. You were listening to our conversation. I make it a point to listen when intelligent things are being said. His smile was slight but genuine. That jacket you're wearing? Custom work? I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. I designed it myself. Talented and resourceful. He pulled out a business card, minimalist, heavy stock, just his name and a phone number. My office, tomorrow at 2. I have a proposition that might interest you. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me clutching his card while the other designers stared in disbelief. I almost didn't go. What proposition could a billionaire possibly have for a struggling designer like me? But Mom's latest medical bill had arrived that morning, and desperation makes you brave in ways nothing else can. His office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. The receptionist led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I waited 15 minutes, rehearsing my portfolio presentation, before Alexander walked in. No apology for his lateness, just straight to business. Your work shows promise, he said, placing a folder on the table. But you're unknown, underfunded, and unlikely to break through in this market without significant backing. I bristled at his bluntness. I didn't come here to be told what I already know. That made him pause, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he smiled. Direct. I appreciate that. He opened the folder. I've done my research on you, Zara Williams. Design degree with honors. Small business struggling to stay afloat. Mother diagnosed with cancer 8 months ago. Mounting medical bills. Am I missing anything? My stomach dropped. How did you— Information is a commodity I trade in. He slid the folder toward me. Inside was a contract, thick with legal language. I have a proposition, 1 year of your time, in exchange for financial security. As he outlined the terms, I felt a strange numbness creep over me. Move into his penthouse, accompany him to social and business events, present ourselves as a couple. In return, he would pay off my debts, cover Mom's medical expenses, and invest in my design business. The contract specified everything: separate bedrooms, no physical intimacy required, confidentiality, absolute. Why me? I finally asked. You could have anyone. Alexander's expression remained neutral. The women in my usual circles come with complications and expectations. You need money, not marriage. You're intelligent, presentable, and clearly talented. Most importantly, you understand business. This isn't business, I said quietly. It's purchasing a person. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, he corrected. 1 year. After that, you walk away with financial freedom and business connections that would take you a decade to build otherwise. I stared out at the city below, at all the tiny lights and buildings where people were making honest livings without selling pieces of themselves. Then I thought of Mom, of her voice getting weaker with each chemo treatment, of her telling me not to worry about the bills. I need time to think, I said, standing up. Alexander nodded. You have until tomorrow. He handed me a card with his personal number. For what it's worth, I don't expect an answer other than no. Most people lack the courage to accept unconventional solutions. That night, I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise. The contract spread out before me. Every time I decided to tear it up, I'd see another medical bill, another past due notice. By morning, I had my answer. I called the number. I'll do it, I said when he answered, but I have conditions of my own. Moving into Alexander Reed's penthouse was like stepping into another dimension. One day, I was in my cramped studio apartment with the leaky faucet and temperamental heating, and the next, I was standing in a glass and steel paradise 40 floors above the city. The place was immaculate, all clean lines, modern art, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. My entire apartment could have fit in just the living room. This will be your space, Alexander said, leading me down a hallway to a bedroom suite larger than my parents' first house. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the kind people pay to see from observation decks. You can decorate it however you like. I set my single suitcase down beside the king-size bed. It's already perfect. It's impersonal, he corrected. My interior designer believes in minimalism. I ran my hand along the pristine white duvet. And what do you believe in? He paused as if the question caught him off guard. Efficiency. Function over form. That's not how you live, I said, gesturing to an abstract painting on the wall that probably cost more than a car. That's how you present yourself. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe curiosity, before his business mask slipped back into place. The housekeeper comes Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. My assistant has arranged for a car to be available to you. Your studio space has been set up in the third bedroom as requested. And just like that, I became a billionaire's live-in girlfriend, except I wasn't really his girlfriend at all. The first week felt like an elaborate game of pretend. We orbited around each other cautiously, like dancers who hadn't practiced together. I'd wake up early, used to my busy schedule, only to find him already in the kitchen, drinking black coffee and reading financial reports on his tablet. Our conversations were practical, logistical. When would we attend our first event together? A charity auction that weekend. What was my coffee preference? Cream, no sugar. Did I need anything for my new design space? Better lighting, which appeared the next day without further discussion. My first public appearance as Alexander Reed's girlfriend was at the Westside Children's Hospital charity auction. He presented me with a black dress I later discovered was custom Valentino. I can't accept this, I said, holding the garment bag like it might bite me. It's not a gift, he replied, his tone matter of fact. It's a business expense. You represent me now. The dress fit perfectly. Of course it did. Standing in front of the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked polished, expensive, worthy of a billionaire's arm. But underneath the designer fabric, my heart was hammering. I was about to lie to an entire ballroom of influential people, about to pretend I belonged in this world. Alexander was waiting in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. When he saw me, he paused. Just for a second, but I caught it, a moment where the mask slipped. You look, he started, then cleared his throat. Appropriate, the car is waiting. That night was a crash course in Alexander's world. He introduced me to people whose names I'd only seen in magazines, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, all greeting him with that particular smile people reserve for those who can do something for them. I smiled, laughed at the right moments, and kept my champagne glass perpetually half full without actually drinking much. Alexander's hand rested at the small of my back, guiding me through the room with practiced ease. That's Victor Chambers, he murmured at one point, nodding toward an older man across the room. Avoid him if possible. He asks personal questions and remembers everything. I nodded, filing away the information. Is that why we're hiding by the ice sculpture? The corner of his mouth twitched. Strategic positioning. When a well-known interior designer approached us, Alexander surprised me by highlighting my work, describing a design concept I'd once mentioned in passing. With such precision, I wondered if he'd been taking notes. By the end of the night, I had 3 potential clients and a feature in a design blog. Later, as the car carried us back to the penthouse, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me all night. Why did you do that? Promote my work? Alexander didn't look up from his phone. Your success benefits our arrangement. The more legitimate your business becomes, the more authentic our relationship appears. It was so coldly practical that I almost laughed. Of course, there was no genuine kindness behind it, just strategy. Everything with Alexander was strategy. Days turned into weeks. I grew accustomed to luxury in small, insidious ways. The perfect water pressure in the shower, the fully stocked kitchen where I never had to check prices before adding items to the grocery order, the driver who appeared whenever I needed to go somewhere. I set up my design studio in the spare room and began working with clients Alexander had connected me with, wealthy people who suddenly trusted my vision because I was associated with him. At night, we'd sometimes share dinner, discussing our days like a normal couple might. He asked questions about my designs, offered insights about materials or suppliers. I found myself genuinely interested in his work, not the money or power, but the way he approached problems, the businesses he chose to invest in. There were moments when I almost forgot our relationship was a transaction. Then he'd receive a call, retreat to his office, and the spell would break. I'd remember who I was and why I was there, the girl who sold a year of her life to save her mother and her dreams, the woman who signed a contract instead of falling in love. But as the weeks passed, something shifted between us, subtle changes in how we moved around each other, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary when passing me coffee. My growing awareness of his schedule, knowing when he needed space or when a rough day at work meant he might appreciate actual conversation over dinner. We were becoming fluent in each other's habits, preferences, moods, and that wasn't part of the contract. That wasn't supposed to happen at all. 3 months into our arrangement, and I had almost convinced myself this was normal. Almost. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the gleaming windows of Alexander's, our penthouse, and wonder who that woman was with her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. The transformation wasn't just external. My design business was thriving. I'd hired 2 assistants, and Mom's treatments were showing promising results. On paper, everything was perfect, but paper lies, contracts lie, and somewhere along the way, the clear boundaries we'd established began to blur. I first noticed it the night of the Harrington Foundation gala. Alexander had been particularly tense that week, locked in his office for long hours, emerging only for the occasional coffee or brief distracted conversation. When I asked if he wanted to skip the event, his response was curt. The contract specifies your attendance at all major social functions. It stung more than it should have. A reminder that despite our growing comfort with each other, this was still a business arrangement. At the gala, Alexander was in rare form, charming, attentive, the perfect partner. To anyone watching, we were madly in love. His arm around my waist, his eyes finding mine across crowded conversations, the intimate smile he'd flash that seemed to say, "This joke is just for us." He was so convincing that sometimes I forgot it wasn't real. Then Sophia Laurent arrived, tall, impossibly elegant, with the kind of old money confidence that can't be purchased or faked. The way Alexander tensed beside me was subtle but unmistakable. "Alexander," she purred, air kissing both his cheeks. "It's been too long." Her eyes slid to me, a fraction too slowly to be polite. "And you must be the new girlfriend." "Zara Williams," I said, extending my hand. "Interior designer. How quaint." She turned back to Alexander. "Your father was asking about you at the club. You should call him sometime." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I'm sure he'll survive the disappointment." Their exchange continued, loaded with subtext I couldn't decipher, until Sophia glided away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and unspoken history. "Former flame?" I asked lightly once we were alone. "Former mistake," he replied, his voice clipped. Then, surprising me, "She wasn't always like that. Success changes people, or reveals them." It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared, a tiny crack in his perfect facade. Before I could respond, he excused himself to speak with a business associate, leaving me to wonder about the man behind the mask I was being paid to adore. Later that night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Alarmed, I hurried to the kitchen to find Alexander standing amid the remains of what had been a whiskey tumbler, his knuckles white against the counter edge. "Are you okay?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled. In that unguarded moment, I saw something raw in his eyes. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't nothing. His phone lay on the counter, screen still lit with what looked like a news article. I glimpsed the headline before he snatched it away. "Reed Technologies faces lawsuit over privacy breach." "It's not your problem," he said, his voice hard. "Maybe not," I agreed, retrieving a broom from the pantry. "But I'm awake now anyway." As I swept up the glass, he watched me with a strange expression. "You don't have to do that." "I know, I want to." I emptied the dustpan into the trash. "Do you want to talk about it?" The article question mark. He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer. "My team discovered a security vulnerability. We fixed it immediately, but someone had already accessed sensitive user data. I made the call to notify everyone affected. Now we're being sued for the breach rather than praised for the transparency." "You did the right thing," I said simply. "The right thing." He gave a bitter laugh. My father would say the right thing was to bury it, protect the stock price at all costs. I considered this man before me, not the billionaire businessman, but someone wrestling with the weight of decisions that affected thousands. Is that why you and your father don't speak? Different definitions of right? His eyes met mine, surprised and perhaps a little wary. That's not in your briefing file. I don't have a briefing file on you, Alexander. I just pay attention. Something shifted between us that night. A wall came down, or at least developed a door. We stayed in the kitchen talking until dawn about his company, about my designs, about the weight of expectations. Not once did he mention our contract or remind me of my role. For those few hours, we were just two people connecting. The next day, I came down with a fever. Nothing serious, just a nasty flu, but it hit hard and fast. I was supposed to accompany Alexander to a business dinner that evening, an important one with potential investors. When I emerged from my room, pale and shaken, he took one look at me and called his assistant. "Cancel tonight," he said, guiding me back to bed. "All of it." "But the contract," I protested weakly. "The contract doesn't require you to work while ill." His hand brushed my forehead, checking my temperature. The gesture was so casually intimate it made my heart stutter. "Rest. I've asked Mrs. Chen to bring up some soup." "You don't have to stay," I murmured, already drifting off. "The investors can wait." His voice was the last thing I remembered before falling asleep. When I woke hours later, I was surprised to find him sitting in the chair by my bed, working quietly on his laptop. He'd stayed, not because a contract required it, but because he'd chosen to. That was the first night I allowed myself to wonder, what if this wasn't just business anymore? What if, against all logic and better judgment, Alexander Reed was beginning to care? The thought should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me, because caring meant complications, and complications weren't part of our deal. More importantly, I couldn't afford to care back. In 9 months, our contract would end. I would walk away with my financial freedom and business connections. That was the plan. That was what I'd signed up for. So why did the thought of leaving suddenly feel like losing something precious? As I drifted back to sleep, I heard my mother's voice from a conversation we'd had weeks earlier when I'd visited her at the recovery center. "There's something different about you," she'd said, studying my face. "It's not the fancy clothes or the new clients. It's your eyes. They light up when you talk about him." I denied it, of course, insisted Alexander was just a business partner, a means to an end. Mom had simply smiled, the knowing smile mothers perfect over decades. "The heart doesn't know about contracts, Zara," she'd said. "It just knows what it wants." Looking at Alexander in the dim light of my bedroom, his face softened by concentration as he worked, I was afraid she might be right, and I had no idea what to do about it. 6 months into our arrangement, Alexander announced we would be traveling to Tokyo for a week. His company was negotiating a major partnership with a Japanese tech firm, and my presence was strategically advantageous. That's how he phrased it. Not "I want you there" or "it would be nice if you came," but strategically advantageous. Clinical, professional, exactly what our relationship was supposed to be. Yet something had been shifting between us since that night I was sick. Small changes in how we interacted. He'd started asking about my mother's health, not as polite conversation, but with genuine concern. I'd begun to notice when he was stressed before he said a word, learning to read the tension in his shoulders, the slight crease between his brows. We'd fallen into domestic rhythms neither of us had planned, morning coffee together, occasional movie nights when his schedule allowed, comfortable silences that didn't need filling. Tokyo changed everything. We arrived after a 14-hour flight on his private jet, a luxury I was still adjusting to. Despite my protests, Alexander had insisted I take the bedroom while he worked in the main cabin. When I woke from a nap to find he'd covered me with a blanket, something warm unfurled in my chest that had nothing to do with the cashmere. The city itself was a revelation, electric and ancient, peaceful and chaotic all at once. Our days were filled with meetings and business dinners where I played my part perfectly, the supportive partner, charming and intelligent, but never overshadowing. At night, we returned to a suite at the Park Hyatt that overlooked the glittering expanse of the world's largest city. On our third night, after a particularly successful dinner with the Japanese executives, Alexander suggested we visit a small jazz club he knew from previous trips. No business contacts, no networking, just music and drinks. It wasn't in our schedule. It wasn't part of the strategy. It was simply something he wanted to share. The club was hidden down a narrow alley in Shinjuku, the kind of place tourists never find. Inside was intimate and darkly lit, with a trio playing soft jazz that seemed to melt into the walls. We were seated at a corner table close enough that our knees touched beneath it. Without the pressure of performance, Alexander was different, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him, telling me stories about his college years, his first failed startup before the success. Why technology? I asked as the server brought our drinks. With your family's money, you could have done anything, or nothing. He considered this, turning his glass slowly. Control, maybe. Numbers don't lie. Code does exactly what you tell it to. People are... He trailed off. Messier, I supplied. Unpredictable. His eyes met mine. Present company especially included. Is that a complaint? I sipped my cocktail, suddenly bold. An observation. The corner of his mouth lifted. You're not what I expected, Zara. When you hired me, when I met you. There was a weight to his words that made my heart beat faster. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I looked away first, watching the saxophone player close his eyes as he coaxed a mournful note from his instrument. What about you? Alexander asked. Why design? The question was simple, but no one had asked me that in years, not the why behind my passion. I told him about growing up in a house where beauty was considered an extravagance, about secretly rearranging furniture when my parents were out, about the first time I transformed a space and saw how it changed not just the room, but the people in it. Spaces tell stories, I explained, leaning forward. They hold emotion, history, possibility. When I design a room, I'm not just picking colors and furniture. I'm creating an environment that shapes how people feel, how they interact. It's intimate. Like what you've done to my penthouse, he said quietly. I blinked. I haven't changed anything. You've changed everything. He wasn't looking at the club anymore, just at me. It was a place I slept before. Now it's somewhere I want to return to. The music faded to the background. The crowd disappeared. All I could see was Alexander, not the billionaire businessman, not my contractor, but the man who'd watched over me when I was sick, who remembered how I took my coffee, who was looking at me now like I was something precious rather than purchased. When he reached across the table and took my hand, neither of us pretended it was for show. There was no audience here, no business associates to convince. His thumb traced circles on my palm, and I let him, knowing we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. We stayed until the club closed, talking about everything and nothing. Favorite books, childhood memories, dreams beyond our current realities. Walking back to the hotel through Tokyo's neon-lit streets, he kept my hand in his. In the elevator, standing closer than necessary, I gathered my courage. Alexander, I said softly, what are we doing? He knew what I meant. The contract, the rules, the careful boundaries we'd established and were now ignoring. I don't know, he admitted, his voice low. I only know I don't want to stop. The elevator doors opened to our floor, but neither of us moved. In that suspended moment, we had a choice: return to the safety of our agreement or risk something far more complicated. I moved first, stepping into the hallway, pulling him gently with me. Whatever was happening between us, I wanted it too. Back in the suite, we stood facing each other in the living area, the Tokyo skyline a glittering backdrop. Alexander reached up, his fingers brushing my cheek with a tenderness that made my breath catch. The contract doesn't cover this, he said, his eyes searching mine for permission. I know. I placed my hand over his. I don't care. When he kissed me, it wasn't the practiced kiss of a man who had bought a companion. It was tentative, questioning, real. I kissed him back, letting months of suppressed feelings surface. His arms encircled me, pulling me closer, and I felt something inside him break open, a vulnerability he'd kept locked away. We talked until sunrise, curled together on the couch, crossing all the lines we'd drawn. He told me about his father's emotional manipulation, about growing up with impossible expectations, about building walls to protect himself from people who only wanted his money or influence. I told him about my fears for my mother's health, my insecurities about my talent, my conflicted feelings about our arrangement. I never expected you, he confessed as dawn broke over the city. You were supposed to be simple, a solution to a problem. I smiled against his shoulder. Am I a problem now? The best kind. He pressed his lips to my forehead. The kind I'm not interested in solving. For the rest of our Tokyo trip, we existed in a bubble of our own making. During business hours, we maintained professional appearances, but every glance, every casual touch was charged with new meaning. At night, we explored the city together, not as employer and employee, but as two people discovering each other alongside ancient temples and futuristic skyscrapers. On our last night, as we packed for the return flight, reality began to creep back in. Back home, there would be questions, complications. Our carefully constructed arrangement was now something neither of us had prepared for. What happens when we go back? I asked, folding a dress into my suitcase. Alexander paused, considering. Nothing changes publicly, as for privately. He came to stand before me, taking both my hands in his. The contract stays in place. It protects both of us. But what's between us is separate from that. It's ours. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even sensible. But as his lips met mine, I knew we'd crossed a point of no return. The contract might dictate our public lives, but our private truth was writing itself, one heartbeat at a time. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was how fragile happiness built on secrets can be, and how quickly it can shatter when those secrets come to light. The tabloid headline hit the morning we returned from Tokyo. Billionaire's black market, Reed's paid companion exposed. Beneath it, grainy photos of us at various events alongside excerpts from our contract, the contract that was supposed to be confidential, locked in Alexander's personal safe. I saw it first, standing in Alexander's kitchen in my pajamas, scrolling through my phone while waiting for the coffee to brew. My mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. That's how Alexander found me, frozen, surrounded by ceramic shards and spilled coffee, my face drained of color. Zara? His voice seemed to come from far away. What's wrong? Wordlessly, I handed him my phone, watched his expression shift from concern to shock, to something cold and dangerous I'd never seen before. Who would... I started, but couldn't finish. Who would expose us? Who had access to that contract? His eyes met mine, and I saw the answer there before he spoke. Sophia Laurent. Your ex? I remembered the woman from the gala, her practiced disdain, the history hanging between them. Her father's company is our main competitor in the security sector. Alexander's voice was tight, controlled in a way that betrayed his fury. She's always had her father's talent for corporate espionage. My mind was racing ahead to the implications. My design clients, wealthy people who prize discretion, my mother still recovering from her final round of treatment, the business I'd built with Alexander's connections now tainted by scandal. Your reputation, I began. We'll survive, he cut in. I'm more concerned about yours. His phone started ringing, then mine. News traveled fast in their world. Within an hour, his publicist, lawyer, and security team had descended on the penthouse. I was shuffled into meetings where people discussed me as if I weren't present. Damage control, narrative management, counter strategies. The contract was legal, the lawyer kept repeating. Unorthodox, but legal. It doesn't matter, the publicist countered. The public won't see a legal arrangement. They'll see a powerful white man who purchased a black woman's companionship. The optics are devastating. I sat silently, watching my life being dissected. Not just my reputation, but my worth as a human being reduced to optics. Alexander argued for a joint statement, for presenting a unified front. His team pushed back, better to distance himself, claimed the contract was misrepresented, perhaps suggest I had manipulated him. That was when I stood up. No. All eyes turned to me. I won't be painted as either victim or villain in a narrative I didn't choose. My voice grew stronger with each word. I made a choice, a difficult, complicated choice that saved my mother's life and my business. I'm not ashamed of that. Alexander's eyes held mine across the conference table, something like pride flickering in their depths. Ms. Williams is right, he said, silencing his team's protests with a raised hand. We proceed with the truth, a consensual arrangement between adults that evolved into something genuine. His publicist looked horrified. The board won't accept. I don't recall asking the board's permission for my personal life, Alexander cut in coldly. For a moment, I glimpsed the steel beneath his polished exterior, the ruthlessness that had built his empire. It should have frightened me. Instead, I felt an absurd urge to laugh. Here he was, risking everything to defend not just me, but us, something that, on paper, shouldn't even exist. But the reprieve was temporary. As the day wore on, the story spread. My phone exploded with texts from friends, some concerned, others accusatory. Design clients began canceling appointments. My assistant called in tears. Protesters had gathered outside our studio with signs calling me a sellout and worse. By evening, when the initial crisis meetings had ended and we were finally alone, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I stood at the penthouse windows, looking out at the city lights, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I should leave, I said when I felt Alexander's presence behind me, until this blows over. Is that what you want? His voice was carefully neutral. I turned to face him. What I want doesn't matter anymore. Your company's stock dropped 15% today. Your board is calling for my head. My business is in ruins. All temporary, he insisted, stepping closer. We weather this together. There is no together, Alexander. The words hurt to say. There's a contract with 6 months remaining and a scandal that's destroying both our lives. The smart move is to end it. Buy out the contract. Let your team spin whatever narrative protects you best. And you? His eyes searched mine. What happens to you? I swallowed hard. I survive. I always do. Something hardened in his expression. So Tokyo meant nothing? Everything we've shared these past months, just business after all. Don't, my voice cracked. Don't make this harder than it has to be. It's already hard, Zara. It's messy and complicated and painful, but it's real. He took my hands in his. I'm not walking away because some tabloid decided our story was worth selling. I'm not letting Sophia win, and I'm certainly not letting you sacrifice yourself to protect me. I wanted to believe him, but the reality of our situation was crashing down around us. This isn't just about us anymore. Your board is meeting tomorrow. They can force you out. Everything you've built, let them try. The quiet confidence in his voice stopped me. What I feel for you is not negotiable. What happened next should have been a moment of clarity, of certainty. Instead, my phone rang, my mother's ringtone. When I answered, her voice was small, confused. Reporters had come to her house. Someone had shown her the headlines. She was asking if it was true, if I had really sold myself to save her. The pain in her voice broke something in me. I ended the call and looked at Alexander, tears streaming down my face. I can't do this. I need to go to her. He nodded, understanding immediately. Take the car. I'll handle things here. As I packed an overnight bag, Alexander kept his distance, respecting my need for space. At the door, he simply said, "Call when you're ready." I'll be here. I spent that night at my mother's house, holding her hand, explaining our complicated truth as best I could. By morning, my decision was made. I called the only person who might understand. Marcus? It's Zara. I need a favor. Marcus had been my first design client. Before Alexander, before everything. He owned a small cabin upstate, isolated, peaceful, the perfect place to disappear while the storm raged. When I texted Alexander that I needed time away, his response was a single word: understood. Not where or how long, just acceptance of my choice. 3 weeks passed at the cabin, 3 weeks of silence, of healing, of thinking. I watched from afar as Alexander faced the board, refused to denounce me, weathered the scandal with dignity. I saw my own story twisted in the media, gold digger one day, victim the next. Neither version was true. Neither captured the complexity of falling in love with someone you were contracted to pretend to love. It was Kira who finally broke my isolation, driving up to the cabin unannounced. "Enough hiding," she said, dropping a stack of magazines on the table. "He's fighting for you. The question is, are you going to fight for him?" The magazines told the story Alexander had chosen to tell, not of a contract, but of two people who found each other in unlikely circumstances, who chose each other despite the complications. "He's calling it love," Kira said quietly. "Is he wrong?" That night, I stared at my phone for hours before finally typing, "I'm coming home tomorrow." His reply came instantly. "Who's home?" The question held everything: uncertainty, hope, possibility. I thought of the penthouse that had never really felt like mine, of my old apartment that represented a life I'd outgrown, of what home really meant. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly, "but I'm ready to find out." When I returned to the city the next day, neither of us was prepared for what awaited us. Sometimes the hardest falls come just when you think you've found your balance again. I returned to my old apartment first, not ready to face the penthouse or what awaited there. It felt smaller than I remembered, emptier, a shell of a life I no longer fit. When the knock came, I knew who it was before opening the door. Alexander stood in my hallway, looking nothing like the polished billionaire from the tabloids. Unshaven, hair slightly disheveled, eyes tired but clear. "The contract," he said simply, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "Our contract. The source of everything." I took it warily. "What about it?" Without a word, he handed me a pen. I understood then. This wasn't an ending. It was an offering. Freedom. Choice. My hands shook as I made the first tear, right through our signatures. Alexander's fingers joined mine, and together we reduced the contract to confetti. "No more terms," he said softly. "No more conditions. Just us," I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, taking my hands. "Just us, if that's what you want." The question hung between us. All these months of pretending, of performance, of calculated gestures, and now the simplest question felt impossibly weighty. "I want the truth," I said finally, "even if it's messy." His smile was slow, genuine, especially if it's messy. It's been 2 years since Alexander and I tore up that contract. 2 years of building something real from the ruins of something manufactured. It wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is. The scandal faded, as scandals do. My design business recovered, stronger for having weathered the storm. Not because of Alexander's connections, but because of my own talent, finally unleashed without fear or limitation. Mom is cancer-free now, asking not-so-subtle questions about grandchildren whenever we visit. As for Alexander and me, we live in a brownstone we renovated together, not his penthouse, not my apartment, but something that belongs to both of us, a space that tells our story, complicated as it is. I've learned that love isn't something you can contract for or protect yourself against. It arrives uninvited, transforming arrangements into attachments, transactions into trust. Would I make the same choice again? Sign that contract, step into that life? The honest answer is yes, not for the money or security, but because sometimes the wrong road leads exactly where you need to go. If you've ever compromised yourself for security or stayed silent about your worth, remember this: real love doesn't come with conditions. Share your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe for more real stories, and remember, sometimes the richest contracts are the ones we tear up.